On August 12th in Charlottesville, Virginia, a woman was killed and many injured in extreme right-wing violence at a demonstration that exacerbated racial tensions in America. What measures should be taken by government to mitigate racial conflict?
We condemn in the strongest possible terms.
Trump made 3 different speeches following the violence. The first was heavily criticized for protecting racism. Why did Trump make different statements, and what's the meaning behind them? Steve Bannon, President Trump's chief strategist, left office last Friday. He was generally perceived as the driving force behind Trump's nationalist ideology. As a core member of the administration, why did he leave the White House? And what does his departure mean for the US policies such as a trade investigation on China? Several cities in the US, including Baltimore, Maryland, and New Orleans, Louisiana, have taken to removing Confederate statues surreptitiously. What prompted them to do so, and what insight can we get from the overall response to these historical monuments?
Violence and protests by white supremacists and other hate groups in Charlottesville, Virginia, has brought long-time racial issues in the United States to the surface once again. While President Donald Trump's statements on violence caused comment and controversy, the argument over divisive public movements celebrating Robert E. Lee and the Confederate States of America continues. Subsequently, Steve Bannon, Trump's right-wing chief strategist, left the White House, vowing to continue fighting his enemies. To discuss many issues related to U.S. violence, racism, and the troubles of Donald Trump, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies and Harvey Zordin, Research Fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. With the violence of supremacists and concerns of the ethnic groups, what do you think of the growing sense of insecurity in the United States, which is known for a long time for being a melting pot?
Oh, indeed, I think the current round of that violence did raise the concern and remind the racism and related violence in the United States, because from time to time we have seen reports. But as I think a student of American history will tell, that this history had a long, this issue had a long history. It goes literally back to the very time when the United States came into existence, came into being. So I think it also raised a question, and actually about the core values of the United States, which I think a lot of people would say the melting spot effect, and whether the spot is able to melt the different sort of culture, and dealt with the challenges because of the changes, the changing dynamic in the United States, and also I think equally important the changes that happened outside the United States.
Harvey, do you think the violence in Charlottesville is an isolated incident in your politics? Among all other social issues, do you think this threatens to tear apart the social fabric and the moral fabric?
As Rong Ying said, the slavery and racism has been the Frankenstein's monster that refuses to die since the very inception of the United States. I think what happened in Charlottesville is symptomatic of a larger malaise that continues in the country. We have a lot of racists, we have a lot of angry people. In Romania, they had Vlad the Impaler. We have Trump, the enabler, because it's Trump who, by refusing to condemn these extreme right-wing bigots, has given them energy and pleased people like the KKK leader David Duke. I think we have a rocky road ahead.
But President Donald Trump has made 3 official statements condemning the violence and racism, and he said, quote, on the tweet, "I want to applaud the many protesters in Boston who are speaking out against the bigotry and the hate." He made 3 statements, and what are the differences?
There were three statements and they were contradictory. In the first statement, he said the violence was a result of bad people on both sides. In the second statement, he condemned the right-wing bigots and supremacists and neo-Nazis by name. In the third statement, he went back to number one and added on that it was not only both sides that were a problem, but he singled out this fake term, the alt-left, for special criticism. This kind of talk is a sign, an inconsistency is the sign of somebody who's not playing with all his marbles.
Now, what do you think of the inconsistency and the weaknesses in the presidency of Donald Trump when it comes to the issue of racism?
I think that the inconsistency and contradiction reflects a big issue facing President Trump himself. I believe that at least look at his campaign and look at how he came into the office. I mean, by winning the election, one would be not surprised to find that when facing, these issues, and he had a very difficult sort of decision to make. On the one hand, he literally, I think, have to show as the president of the United States, he has to uphold these principles, these core values that has been helped bring the United States together, making the United States a kind of a country that had always tried to play a kind of a role model in terms of the inclusiveness, multiculturalism, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, I think he got, his constituency got, a problem that he have to at least please or keep them in good mood, in the sense that the followers of this white nationalism or even supremacism that he represents, he needs to continue to count on the support of these guys, which I think politically, as now he's a president, politically it will be very difficult to do.
Do you think this is his sin, basically, to rely on the white supremacists so that he's displayed strong mixed feelings in the three separate official statements?
I think Donald Trump doesn't think about the good of the country. He usually thinks more about the good of Donald Trump. And I think he's doing it in this case as well. He's thinking about his political base, which is less educated white males, exactly a key demographic of these people who were violently demonstrating in Charlottesville. So I think he's always going to do what's best for Donald Trump and not best for the country. And by being Trump the enabler, I think he's giving these people tremendous power, and that's why I said before that I think that incidents like this will continue.
Samuel Huntington, a renowned professor of political science from Harvard University, wrote many articles and books about modernization, modernity, social transformation, ethnicity of different countries, particularly impact of social transformation with regard to rule of law, military coup, so on and so forth. Now, he asked one question about whether America is still American. The context of the statement being with the growing immigration, the melting pot threatens to replace and outnumber whites. Ethnic groups are of course outnumbering the whites. So do you think this is the fundamental reason behind the removal of many statues commemorating the Confederate General Robert E. Lee and his soldiers in some of the public parks in the United States? Harvey?
Well, I think that, as they say, history is written by the victor. And I think this is partially a case of that. And so it depends who you ask. If you ask people south of the Mason-Dixon line, the line that divided the North from the South, a majority of the people will be in favor of keeping those statues. This is one position, and maybe a reasonable one. And a recent public opinion survey showed that a majority of Americans would like to keep those statues. But I think most people who would like to keep the statues think there should be interpretive data as well, and put those statues in context. So it's not a celebration of slavery or a celebration of racism, but a commemoration of some trauma that the country went through and continues to go through.
Robert E. Lee is, after all, part of the United States. It's part of the collective memories of this nation. So do you think removal of such statues would indicate the end of American spirit for being able to tolerate and to be diversified?
Robert Lee definitely, I think, is a personality, I think, highly respected by American people, despite the fact that he was defeated, despite the fact that he was fighting for the Confederacy.
But
right?
before the war, he served with distinction
yes,
on the the North side.
That's right. But I think the problem here is that I guess it's between on the one hand, it is the maintenance or preservation of history and culture. On the other is a kind of a question whether, I mean, we should sort of like the white supremacists, I mean, to make it a symbol of the other side that these statues represent, the segregations, the slavery system, and so on and so forth. So I thought that the debate is interesting in the sense that in the United States, and they used to be very proud that while the Robert Lee and the Confederacies has been defeated, but they were able to maintain as part of the history and the culture of the United States. But now this has become problematic because these white nationalists, these supremacists, they are now, I mean, using this as a symbol to campaign something that is different, directly challenge or contradict the core values of the United States. So that's why I think that the decision has already been made by the universities like UT Austin and Duke to remove, not remove totally, not demolish, to remove from the main hall of the universities to a different place, a center of history. That is where they believe it is the right place for these statues to stay.
Many Chinese students who managed to come back after finishing their academic studies across the Pacific Ocean may have also brought back American dream or their understanding about the American dream. They have been memorized with the appeal of American democracy one way or another. However, I wonder if they are clearly aware of the other side of the same coin. For example, the existence of a Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis and other white supremacist groups. Why does the United States and why does the U.S. Constitution allow for the existence and the inclusion of such hate groups? In Germany, in the post-war years, I'm afraid the Constitution would not allow racist groups to survive, apparent reason of the Second World War. But the United States, being the flagship democracy for free world, why? We don't understand.
Democracy is not a perfect system, as we've discussed here on a number of occasions, but it's a system that generally works well. But there are points at which it bumps up against realities. For example, we put hundreds of thousands of Japanese American citizens in concentration camps
during the Second World War. After Pearl Harbor.
And it will be forever a shame on America's history. But in terms of the Constitution and free speech does only go so far. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said in a famous Supreme Court case, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. And so there is a limit. And now the American Civil Liberties Union, a leading organization that in the past has defended neo-Nazis, has taken the position, in light of Charlottesville, that they will not defend neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and so on, who come with weapons and who come with the intent to commit violence. And there's also another amendment at play here. In America, we have 350 million people. we have 350 million guns. The Second Amendment, as currently interpreted by a conservative Supreme Court, says that individuals have the right to bear arms. So you've got the First Amendment, freedom of speech. You've got the Second Amendment about the right to bear arms. You've got these white supremacists. I saw one picture, I was horrified, carrying a semi-automatic weapon. This instills fear in people. I don't think this is what the Constitution is all about.
And part of the nightmare concerning the violence in Charlottesville is some of the supremacists were carrying firearms. And yet in the clashes, they didn't trigger the rifle, and none of such casualties ever occurred as such. So what do you think of the characteristics of American democracy? Each year, still immigrants in their thousands go to the United States pursuing American dream, and yet the Second Amendment has continuously generated more violence and nightmares than dream in its original sense.
Yeah, at least I think it is these incidents, or what we have been discussed about, tells us largely that democracy is only one of the systems of government. And I would also argue that possibly it is something in the process. The United States, I mean, certainly I would say it's very proud of this system. But as we all know, and the United States and the American people, they know very well, their system is not perfect. I would argue that there's no perfect system in the world. But the American dream possibly is a different thing. And a lot of people, I think, either out of the disappointment or desperation about what about the system they had to have, or as kind of expectation or dream that United States, given the success and the stories that they heard, possibly there was no new opportunity. As a matter of fact, I think the first sort of settler, first immigrant that moved from Europe to the United States was because they had that dream, and also there are a lot of successful. Now the question is that it seems that it's even more difficult. It's difficult for American people, let alone immigrants, to succeed. So this is, I think, the problem we are facing.
One thing I find really troubling that I've thought about since I was a boy is why the people who came in huge waves at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, why those people who were pursuing the American dream are now exactly the same people who would deny it to others. I mean, and I think the poster child for this is Donald Trump and his family. Donald Trump's grandfather ran a house of ill repute in Alaska and became very rich. He had an Irish mother. He had a grandfather who also was a tax evader and a draft dodger. I guess that bad apples don't fall far from the tree.
And he married someone from Central Europe.
Exactly. Two people from Central Europe, but not at the same time.
Okay, well, what a track record of your presidency. You are watching Dialogue with Rong Ying and Harvey Zodian. We're discussing latest violence in Charlottesville and why white supremacists start to generate headlines in the United States, which is known for being a free democracy in the world. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The issue of ethnicity threatens to divide the United States, and for years and years, Americans, or most of them, have been proud of the core values that help cement the solidarity of this great country, the sole superpower with war. Today, with the rise of populism and the resurge of racism, do you think the United States will fall apart, quote unquote? Not exactly we're gonna have the demise, but do you think the spirit itself will fall apart for the unity that you used to enjoy?
I think this is and I hope that it's a temporary situation. And I lay a lot of the blame, again, I'm sorry to keep picking on my president, but I lay a lot of blame at the president and the Republican Party because of the fact that they're the ones who have the leadership but aren't exercising it. They have what Theodore Roosevelt, one of our great presidents, called the bully pulpit. But they're not choosing to lead the country, to make America what Ronald Reagan said it was, a shining city on a hill. They're leading it to be something completely different. I believe if and when, and I believe it'll be sooner rather than later, there's new leadership in America, that the situation will change. I think if you look at the opinion polls and you see that President President Trump's opinion poll ratings today are an average of 39%, and his disapproval rating is 55%. And look at the fact that he won the election but lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. His situation is quite tenuous. He doesn't have he's enabled these minority of people, and I think it's temporary.
Some of the guys that I come to know in China who have been very supportive of the presidency of Donald Trump point out, well, President Trump deserves the credit for shattering our human hypocrisy and what is called the politically correct pretensions of the elites and the establishment. He deserves the credit for getting this job done, but he paid a heavy price, and he's going to pay more for the bravery. What do you think of our own human weakness of being the hostage of human pretensions? I mean, we are aware of the issue of racism, and we tend to be politically correct one way or another.
I don't think President Trump has a clear vision of what he wants to do both domestically and internationally. He's shown that by his choices of the few people he's appointed to top positions, both in the White House, his cabinet, and in the few positions that he's appointed in the executive branch agencies. I think he's wallowing. I think he's very much taking a page from Steve Bannon's playbook, and that is to be a Leninist, to cut the government down, to destroy the government and start all over again. And I'm really disappointed in one thing especially. Donald Trump ran on the fact that he was going to drain the swamp of Washington of special interests. But who does he appoint? Most of his appointees are the 0.1% of the top income earners in America. They're the swamp dwellers themselves.
One after another, senior advisors of President Donald Trump have left him and left the White House. And this guy, father of Ivanka, is being left isolated, if not marginalized, in American politics. I mean, what's your reading of this part of American politics? What is the fundamental, the ideology of Steve Bannon, who seems to be the target of so much public, finger pointing in the United States?
I think, first of all, Steve Bannon represents a kind of a faction or forces of extreme or far-right rightist forces that we are discussing, white nationalism and the white supremacism and so on and so forth. And that is, I think, why people don't like, because I think the American public in general, and the media in particular, they don't think it is in a good way. It is a good sort of approach to the problem, to the troubles the United States is having. And the second, of course, I guess because of his style, the personal style, and he pick up enemies everywhere and creating a kind of big trouble for the smooth sort of operation of White House. And I thought that the departure of, and of course, thirdly, we have the chief of staff, which has now would like to put in hope that would like put some control on that. But the question is that the departure of Steve Bannon, does it necessarily mean the departure of his ideology? does it mean that, the departure of the influence and other thinking, the ideas which I think Donald Trump, to some extent, still I think very much values. So this is a big question.
I don't think that it's a departure. I think it's a change of venue for Bannon, and I think Bannon.
Are you saying this is a game changer for the presidency of Donald Trump with the ouster of Steve Bannon?
No, I fully predict that he'll be speaking to Bannon on a regular basis. He'll be reading his online news service and taking a lot of information from there, as he has done from Fox News. And also, I believe that Trump will continue to get direction and inspiration from Bannon. And I believe Bannon is much more dangerous than Trump.
Excuse me, why
Bannon's a true believer. Trump is an opportunist.
It's a master-student relationship. But why did you mention Fox News as a source of strength for the presidency of Donald Trump?
Because it's one of the sources of information for Trump, because Fox News represents a conservative viewpoint and a very strong conservative viewpoint. He watches it to get inspiration. He watches CNN to get perspiration and to get angry. But you have to look now that Fox News is even changing, because with a new generation of Murdochs leading Fox News, they're probably going to take a more balanced position.
You know, a skeptical global audience has been impressed by his body language, such as waving the fake news at the press briefing. But let's go back to the beginning of our interview as to why we decided to do this program about Donald Trump and what happened in Charlottesville. The removal of the statues of the Confederate states has caused much of the public rage. And what do you think of the remarks by President Trump to stop such violence, stop removing such statues? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, among all others who signed the Declaration of Independence, both owned slaves in those days. Now, if you decide to remove the statue of Robert E. about the others, and that's what he said. I think we should not simplify the so-called evils of President Trump and the misconduct, quote unquote, of this elected president. Let's look at the fundamental reason behind the surge in violence and racism. Do you think this is a realistic option for the general public to remove their statues one after another? And what about your collective memory? What about your history? That means the end of your history, right?
Right. I mean, I think, again, it depends who you're talking to and what their perspective is. For some people, it's history. For some people, it's a symbol of something that they, but not many other people, believe in. And maybe the best way is to keep those statues around, maybe not on the grounds of important governmental offices, but maybe in universities where education is supposed to take place, and to put them in the context with a lot of material that you can get on your mobile phone or on an app, because that represents a period of our history. As we talked about before, this issue of slavery has been around since the founding of America, and unfortunately it's not solved yet. It's not solved by a civil war. It's not solved by the Civil War movement, civil rights movement. It's not solved today.
Perhaps it's high time for the stunned lawmakers in the D.C. across the aisle to consider whether they should do yet another piece of legislation to prevent the escalation of such violence in southern U.S., where the issue of racism starts to generate headlines today. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.